Captain Midnight.
This video will contain spoilers. A stock character type that I've always loved and that's super easy to mock because for many of us, it's one of the first things you try writing when you're like 13, is the quiet, stoic, badass type. I'll be honest with you, when a character like this clicks for me, I just can't get enough of it. I will reconstruct Geralt of Rivia and other RPG character creators just to get my guy back. And it was an element of The Mandalorian that I enjoyed back in season 1. But watching The Mandalorian and Grogu in theaters this week, I was so incredibly bored with our bounty hunter hero. He was so flat, emotionless, faceless. Sitting in the theater, it was hard to remember the last time I watched a film with a lead this dull and this static. So that made me wonder, when I do like these quiet, badass heroes, what do I like about them that I wasn't finding here? Why had my reaction to this character changed so much? And maybe most importantly, why does the Mandalorian himself feel so hollow? And how do so many other characters in this vein avoid that problem? I'm going to talk about the movie generally, but for this video, I really wanted to hone in on Din Djarin specifically because I think there's a lot to talk about here. There's probably another conversation to be had about what this movie, being the first Star Wars film in 7 years, says about the state of the franchise in general, but instead of being annoyed at this for not being something else entirely, like a project more aligned with Andor, or even just a Star Wars film that's trying to move the series forward in any meaningful way, I'm going to try to take it on its own terms, and look at how successful it is at hitting the marks of its unambitious but very achievable sci-fi adventure movie goals. A simple Mando and Grogu story is not what I wanted from a Star Wars movie at this point, but even on its own modest terms, it doesn't really work. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to our leading man here, or men if you want to count the stand-ins and doubles for Pedro Pascal, so let's talk about him. I will say, The Mandalorian and Grogu has a few things really working against it when it comes to capturing the kind of quiet, dangerous lead characters from the westerns and samurai movies that it's so indebted to. You take Toshiro Mifune in Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo, and one of the best things about that movie is watching this opportunist take advantage of this gang war, while also having a quiet moral code of his own that becomes more clear as the plot goes on. In dialogue, he's a very understated character, which makes every action he takes even more meaningful as we come to understand him through his actions more than his words. Well, audiences already know what Mando stands for. We've had 3 seasons with him. Your expectations are firmly in place for who he is, and this movie will not, even for a moment, make you second guess that by having him do anything that's even mildly unexpected. So maintaining the mysterious nature of characters like this is already fighting an uphill battle, and probably a big part of why he feels so much less impactful than he did in season 1 of the show. And then there's the mask. The Mandalorian mask is an iconic element to the character, and it's also, how they get Pedro Pascal to technically be the star of this movie and only have to pay him for physically being there in one scene. But it's also incredibly limiting. When we talk about actors like Mifune or Clint Eastwood, we're talking about performers who can convey an entire world of inner feelings, conflicts, and turmoil in a single reserved glance or eye movement. Now, whether Pedro Pascal can do the same isn't all that important because he just rarely gets the opportunity to as this character, relying on a flat, affectless voice and body language that's been split across multiple doubles. I think this would actually work better for a malevolent take on the silent badass type, like Eastwood plays in High Plains Drifter, where he's this unknowable, ghostly spirit of a character. Less so for a guy you're supposed to grow to love and empathize with. It's almost like the Mandalorian's helmet was designed more for a more malicious, emotionless bounty hunter character. I really can't say how that happened. But no, the Boba Fett helmet and the familiarity with the character aren't the only issues here. I mean, hey, there was a sequel to Yojimbo, Sanjuro, where audiences were far more familiar with its lead Ronin, and it still works great. The larger problem here is that a stoic, man-of-few-words protagonist like this requires conveying a lot of the story and the emotional beats visually instead of through dialogue, and contemporary Disney just doesn't seem up to the task. George Lucas has said that one of the reasons he loves Kurosawa so much is that he's part of the last generation that was still heavily influenced by silent movies. That's very obvious in Yojimbo, where ideas and character moments can be expressed through imagery, with careful blocking and staging. And it's also a world away from the level the Mandalorian and Grogu is kind of operating on. And sadly, that even extends to the performances. Jon Favreau, who directed this, used to be known as an actor's director, being an actor himself. You can really see that in the first Iron Man, the way those performances felt loose and alive. He was never Kurosawa or Sergio Leone behind the camera, few are. But hey, at least he could bring really lively characters to the screen. Well, it seems like the quasi-live-action Lion King remake completely changed his work, because basically none of that is on display here. Sigourney Weaver gives what I can only describe as the worst performance I have ever seen from her, just snoring through exposition scenes. Jeremy Allen White, who is so full of energy and emotion in The Bear, gives a completely forgettable voice performance as Jabba's son, and Pedro Pascal definitely doesn't fare much better. Really, the puppetry work on Grogu is the one thing the movie doesn't seem checked out on. That was genuinely impressive stuff. With Pascal though, I'm not even sure how much of this is actually his fault. You'd think a Mandalorian movie would offer up some character stakes that go beyond what you'd expect from an average episode of the show. I know it was a different circumstance with a show from a different era, but look at like the Firefly movie, Serenity. That was a film that took the mission of the week structure of the show and understandably tried to tell a story on a much grander scale, with major discoveries that the series only hinted at and consequences for its cast that you wouldn't see in just any random episode. That is not the case for this movie at all. I mean, this all feels like another Thursday at the office for the bounty hunter, where he's barely emotionally involved in the action. The season 2 finale, where he removes his helmet and embraces Grogu, is 10 times more meaningful for the character than anything that happens to him here, and I really do not think that's an exaggeration. If a TV show-based movie already felt like a footnote in the history of Star Wars films, The Mandalorian and Grogu somehow manages to feel unimportant next to even, like, their episodes in Book of Boba Fett. It's a strange choice, and it means that a character as internal as Mando has even less to work with than usual. When you think of the kind of spaghetti westerns and samurai movies that inspired the series, something you'll see again and again in them is our lead going into desperate, downtrodden places where violence and injustice are being visited upon the innocent. And even if our hero is used to life being hard and unfair, the situation is so bad that a choice has to be made. Even if they're initially just in it for the money, they give us a glimpse of who they are, or at least who they aspire to be, by sticking their neck out and doing the right thing. It's not the most original concept in the world, but it still works because it's a rock-solid setup for a story that has stood the test of time. The Mandalorian Season 1 seemed to understand this. And the movie doesn't really give us locales or anyone inhabiting them that would make us feel anything like that. I guess its one attempt is Rada the Hutt, who Mando is originally going to locate and retrieve, giving him back to his family, before making the choice that no, he's going to go with Rada's plan instead. But he only does this when Rada offers him an alternative plan that will satisfy Mando's main mission. Then, in the third act, we see Mando willing to save him, because, I mean, they've both already been captured, they're both there, so why not? I feel like this leaves our hero in this weird middle ground. He's not all that emotionally involved in Rada's story, and neither are we. We get the same information that Rada is not like his father over and over again, but there's no texture to the Hutts at all beyond that. The initial plan to get around not turning him in does feel like Mando doing him a favor, but he also gets his man too, so it's not like it was some big sacrifice on Mando's part. It ends up feeling like a baffling way to tell this story, where we get the end result of Mando setting aside his cold bounty hunter instincts to do the right thing, but it doesn't feel like there's any internal story for the character that builds to that. It just feels like something he felt like doing one day because they both happen to be captured. It makes everything feel so inconsequential. And I think if the movie did a better job of fleshing out Rada and the world of the Hutts, they could have had something with this story. It didn't have to be this lightweight. They're a brutal crime syndicate. Give us a reason for Mando to oppose them that really feels like anything is on the line. Deliver an emotional gut punch or two. Tap into those feelings of righteous anger that the genres that this whole movie is supposed to be paying homage to understand so well. Basically just give us a reason to care. They don't. We're left with a story that feels like it would pass muster on a Star Wars theme park ride, and that's about it. And what's really strange is how little they really utilize the Mando and Grogu relationship. For a movie, again, it's shockingly static. Nothing at all really changes between them. I liked the sequence where Mando was unconscious and poisoned, with Grogu having to fend for both of them for like 10 or 15 minutes. But even that doesn't add up to any actual change. Grogu doesn't do much of anything we haven't seen him do before. Mando comes out completely unscathed. It's all just so safe, even by the standards of a pretty low-key action movie. When you have a character whose emotions tend to be under the surface, with a face that's kept from the audience for 95% of the runtime, you absolutely need actions to speak louder than words. And you need to give us a setting and circumstances that can communicate how high the stakes are, even as our lead remains stoic and level. The Mandalorian and Grogu has almost none of that. The stakes, the dialogue, the half-hearted secondary characters, it all adds up to the single most boring version of this quiet hero archetype I've ever seen put on the big screen. Star Wars has really struggled with its many tones in the Disney era. Jumping from something lighthearted to dark is a lot harder than it looks. Just balancing tones is tough. That was a lesson that Vince Gilligan had to learn the hard way before he created Breaking Bad. And that tension is at the center of my latest episode of Showrunners, where he's the main focus. As the creator of some truly great shows, Gilligan had to guide enormous, complicated productions without losing what made them work in the first place. In this episode, I look at how he managed that balancing act, and why so many shows fail where he succeeded. And Gilligan is just one of the figures that I'm exploring. There's also an episode on Rod Serling, creator of The Twilight Zone. Every installment of Showrunners dives into the people behind some of the most influential series in TV history. It's a project I've wanted to make for a long time, and really a way to unpack how television actually gets made. If you haven't seen it yet, now's the perfect time to start. You can watch Showrunners right now exclusively on Nebula, where it lives alongside exclusive videos from creators like Lindsay Ellis, Nando V Movies, and other shows like Cinema Styx's Let's Rewind. There's over 200 creators on Nebula now, and it's only growing. You'll also get all my regular videos there, ad-free. You can grab a 50% off annual membership for just $30 for the whole year, or about $2.50 a month. Head to go.nebula.tv/captainmidnight, use the QR code on screen, or click the link below to watch the Gilligan episode right now.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.